I want to first and foremost welcome you to tonight's program, which is a talk between myself. My name is Negarra Kudumu. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the curator here at CoCA. Between myself and our current exhibiting artist, Meghan Elizabeth Trainor, whose amazing exhibition is open for just a few more days until Saturday, August 21st. So please come tomorrow and Saturday if you have not had a chance to see the exhibition. The title of her exhibition is Let Us Not Confuse Zero with the Stillness of Electrons. It is a really, really amazing engagement commentary on the origins of computer science with a interactive and very down-to-earth and accessible entryway towards a deeper understanding of the origins of that discipline and how the possibilities for how it can work for us, the general lay people, in the current moment. And so we are very happy to have Meghan with us. We are looking forward to a really engaging, but also just very relaxed and organic conversation. We will save some time at the end for Q&A, but I would like to go ahead and get started so we can take advantage of the evening. So, Meghan, if I can ask you to just briefly introduce yourself to our guests in person and virtual.
Okay, hello everyone. Hello everyone in the gallery. Hello everyone out there in digital space. Again, my name's Meghan. I'm a visual artist from Seattle, Washington, although I did some time in New York City. And I'm here to talk about my show. So I'm going to answer any questions that Negarra may ask. But probably I'll just start right off the bat with the title. So Let Us Not Confuse Zero with the Stillness of Electrons comes from a rather sort of humble place, in my opinion. It's just trying to explain circuitry when I've been teaching or even learning about circuitry myself. And the whole idea of digital technology, we kind of boil it down to like zeros and ones. So if we think of the beginning of the matrix, and it's a bunch of, it's that green on black that we think of as sort of computer space. But when we're dealing with the circuit, the on and off, the highs and lows, what we think of as the zeros and ones is actually just high and low voltage in the circuit. So it's whether the electrons are moving or not. And I think that really can fundamentally change our relationship to the ideas of information. But it's not a chalice and a blade. It's not nothing and something. It's just whether or not the electrons are moving, or they still are active. And so that poetics that sits inside every every piece of electricity in the world, I think is something that is a place we should spend some time meditating on. So that's where the title comes from.
Awesome. Thank you for walking us through that. I'd like to get into now sort of the genesis of this work. So what were you thinking through intellectually, but also visually, artistically, that led you to focus so intently? Because this is one of several iterations of this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is the genesis? What was the origin? Where were you at when you first created this?
So there's a couple different origins or genesis, I think. I think an interesting starting point, though, is a text that I created for the Sigil box set, which was curated by Sharon Arnold of Bridge Productions. Jazz Brown was also in that box set. And I had kind of gone to the woods, as it were, and started to think about ways to integrate different parts of my life. And also was thinking through the way that we contextualize our understanding of where technology comes from. What are the roots of computer science? What are the roots of even mathematics and science? And they're a little bit funky, a little bit off. So I was thinking about ways we could repair our understanding of that history. So I started with the idea of a speculative history of a sort of conspiracy of technologist witches in the medieval period. And it was this completely fictional, speculative idea. And so I wrote the story called The Familiar Algorithm. And over the years, I've done more and more research into that story, and it's not very speculative anymore. There's really a lot of the way that we frame our understanding of computer science and the technologies in general. There tends to be erased people. And if we start to shine light on those people, I was doing it speculatively at first, and then I just found them. I was like, I conjured these people. Oh, they actually exist. That's not me. That's, Johannes Kepler, the grandfather of astrophysics. His mother's a witch, and he wrote what is possibly the first novel in science fiction called The Dream, in which a witch shows and her son are shown by demons or familiars how to travel to the moon. And this book's kind of lauded as this like first examination of the moon is like from a physics perspective, but it's the story of how a witch uses a familiar to travel into the moon. And I think like let's take a moment and think about that. So that Genesis moved into the space of really saying we just need to uncover why we make a distinction between the proto-scientists we call alchemists and the primarily women who are doing the similar activities, but towards healing rather than let's go for the philosopher's stone. So the alchemists were by and large concerned with the philosopher's stone. We want gold and the extension of life. And they did that for centuries and centuries. Not all alchemists were men. The most famous alchemist is Cleopatra, not that Cleopatra, active in the 4th century, right? But by and large, they, where we get chemistry, we understand that comes from the alchemists. Where we get astrology from, astronomy from, we get that from astrology. Like, so we're the proto-sciences, but when we say they're sort of folding over, we're fine with Isaac Newton being an alchemist, and then he, is also the scientist. But we say like everything that these witches were doing, that's superstition because they were concerned with healing. I think it's interesting at some point the alchemists all gave up with the philosopher's stone and they just became colonists. So they're like, we want gold from over there and we're going to find the fountain of youth because we couldn't make that philosopher's stone thing happen. So there's the genesis.
Okay. That is wildly interesting. I feel like there's so many parts of that we could unpack. And so I'm gonna probe just a little bit deeper into the Genesis part. And so what part of the world are we talking about in terms of geography? And if it's multiple places, lovely, but where are we talking about in terms of geography? Where are we when are we talking about in terms of chronology? And you mentioned a few of the people who were active in these areas. Could you maybe go in a little bit more depth? Particularly, obviously, I'm biased because of the work that I do, but I'm curious about the women who were working on the spiritual side, if there were any known sort of cases, scenarios, historical events that really center around these ideas that you're working with.
There's a couple questions. I'm going to go backwards.
Yeah, please.
So, so let's talk about Frankenstein.
Yes, let's.
So here we have, it's not named in the book, right? It's not actually named, but the idea is that we're using electricity to reanimate objects, to reanimate flesh, right? To deceased flesh. I don't know, more poetic way to say that, but so I think it's interesting. Again, we have this beginnings of science fiction centering around women in history. Now, I will say I focus primarily on what's happened in Europe and that sort of just before the Enlightenment. Okay, just a few hundred years that period, and I focus on that. A lot of that for me is like staying in my lane.
Right.
So what I hope my work does when I'm saying we need to sort of conjure the people that we need from our histories, I'm going to focus on, people I have lineage, my heritage,
right? But
I want to hold that door open for other people. Right. So things like indigenous futurisms or Afrofuturism that is dealing with another reclamation. Like I want to shine a light on that. It's just not something I'm going to make work out. Yeah. But so I focus on that period, and then I have my own cultural history as an Irish American. So some of my work is calling very specifically back to that space. So then, you'll hear me talk about things like bogs and bog butter and the Morrigan and those kinds of spaces where, I think we're very awkwardly, in this, after colonialism, in late capitalism, trying to reclaim a history that's been kind of severed in different ways, both as cultural figures, as along gender lines. There's all sorts of different things to unpack, and so we all kind of have that work to do. Yeah. Of uncovering what's been kind of shoved aside as we've shown light on a specific space for a long time. So how do we move that light around? And that's, I guess that's what I take umbrage with. Like the age of enlightenment seems really narrow.
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah. That's a whole public program. I don't think we have enough time for that this evening. So as you were talking, I'm immediately thinking about, okay, so let's drive this forward to when the internet became a thing. And of course, we're in Seattle. We are in this whole landscape that is formed and heavily influenced by businesses and individuals who were neck deep in this. But the implication here, or at least what I'm hearing and thinking about, are the ways in which the genesis appears to be such a far cry from what computer science is, when in fact, this is the basis in many cases of computer science, but computer science is so obfuscated and people have this non-understanding of what computer science is, with the exception of what companies do it. My phone is a, Android versus an iPhone. And so could you talk about the ways in which the tech industry, intentionally or not, has contributed to sort of on the surface, this history being completely and totally like, not phased out, but like almost invisible, almost made invisible, and replaced with this language and this culture that is really not what it was, and it may really not be an appropriate iteration of what it actually is still today.
Yeah, I think the culture around tech can, it's the fairly recent culture around tech, is what it is. There are some hidden figures. Sorry. And so if we go back just a few generations, who we think of as a computer scientist, who we think of as a technologist, changes dramatically. And a lot of that has to do with how much people were paid. So if this is if programming is a secretarial job, then that's women's work. And it was for a very long time. When money comes in, suddenly only men can do this, and people write manifestos to that effect. And I have to roll my eyes and make a whole art show about it, because that's how I roll. I think that what needs to happen for individuals like that who think women's brains aren't even capable of doing computer programming, it is laughable, but you can't respond to that kind of idea with a correction. And you can't respond to a problem of missing women or missing, any group that's missing from computer science with, an initiative, or somebody's been appointed to a role where you tell people to lean in or go to boot camp. What I think this is me, what I think you have to do is you need to create a strong mythology which grounds people in that identity that says, no, this belongs to you too, and here's why. And so what I'm doing is saying, look, we need to think about the relationship between computer science and weaving. And then we don't have a problem with understanding that this comes from women's work, and that probably it was all these women weavers all over the planet, thousands of years, that gave us the processing power to be able to do computer science. Because we've got 10, 20, 100,000 years of like figuring out complex geometry. We've got the X and the Y, except it used to be called the warp and the weft. It's just reframing what this is. And then you can just sort of dismiss the can women program. Like, it's a ridiculous question, but you can't respond to ridiculous questions or ridiculous regimes with logic.
That part.
You have to respond with mythology, right? Which is maybe problematic, but that's what I'm doing.
That you might be onto something there, friend. Well, we're gonna have to talk about that more offline.
Put a pin in it.
So I'd like to get into the materiality and talk about in depth the materials that you've chosen to use in this iteration of the exhibition, but also in previous iterations, and to sort of break down for us the meaning and the intent behind those materials, because I imagine while there might not be a huge range of materials that are optimal for this kind of work, there is some diversity that you could choose from, and that knowing that you have explored that in different iterations. So if you could walk us through the materials.
Sure. So I'll start by just saying, so I wrote this essay. I love pointing at you because we had that talk about it. So I wrote this essay imagining, I conjured this history of, a slightly more exciting witchcraft in the medieval or late medieval period that involved actual technology, and maybe that's the secret thing in the woods that the church was so worried about, and that's maybe what Mary Shelley was throwing shade at. Like, what are y'all doing? And then I was like, maybe I should start building what I think those things would be like. And then I started imagining what a very crafty cottage computer science would look like. What would it be like to work with electricity in the 16th century in the woods? And if you think about like early electrical experiments, like galvanic piles and things like that, where you have these kind of brass, it's almost like steampunky, right, to us, these sort of handcrafted technologies. So what would it be like if these were, hedge witches out in the woods doing the same thing? And let's think about how, the church, that was sort of the structure at the time, was very like not into science. That was something they did in the Middle East. They've got those algorithms and all that stuff. We don't like that. So the witches at that time were probably the furthest removed from the power, so they could just be messing around with power, right? So, so I started thinking about what that material reality would look like, and then I thought about what would a witchcraft that was infused with the beginnings of computer science 100, 200 years into the future, into the present day, look like if my practice was just combined with those early findings of like how to marry some ideas from the ancient Greeks, some stuff I'm getting from the Middle East, from North Africa, my practice, ancient pagan ways, and then we just follow it forward into 2021. This is my hypothesis, right? And so this work is the actual physical material. The encaustics are simply encaustic medium, so that's beeswax and damar resin. And resin is really handy because if you mix it with carbonized wood, you can make an anode for electrodes to generate current. The pigment is carbonized rosemary from my yard. And so because of the timeline for this show, I was creating these pigments in the yard in June. I don't know if y'all remember what happened in June. It was the hottest temperature in the history of Seattle, and I'm outside. This giant flaming bowl of rosemary, like, okay. And so that, and then the copper you see there is it's conductive tape, so you can also create circuits with that. So I'm really interested in the natural world. What is conductive material? What's insulative material? What can I make a circuit out of? And so that's something I'm always tracking. And then we have, for those who are in the gallery, we can see that we have these instead of using like a plastic breadboard or a green circuit board, I've used bone.
Okay.
Because I imagine if you're building circuits as a witch in the 16th century, you'd be using bone. So you've got copper wire that's just kind of floating instead of these like discrete little neat circuits, which is sort of pushing away at the miniaturization of most of the computer technology we work with. For those of us that work in physical computing, we're used to like working with breadboards, we can solder things. We're experiencing computers as a material machine that I think we lose as the rest of us because everything's locked away inside of this proprietary object that's so small. It's not like a car you can go in and tinker with. And so I'd love us to get back to a place where all of our computers are just like old cars, where we can go and say, I just got to fiddle the carburetor. And I understand what's happening there, and I have more ownership rather than the world we live in now, where like all our experience of
Our apologies. We had a quick disruption, but we should be fine. we're going to pick up where we left off, just in terms of talking the materiality, the breadboards, that.
Yes. We're the bones, yes. And so, oh yeah, so if I go back to the text that I had written, the familiar algorithm, one of the ideas there was that the jumpstart on robotic systems comes from the witches of the time trying to continue a relationship with their familiars. So after they were deceased, that they would exhume the bodies, but then use these new systems they were learning about logic and using mechanics and things of that nature. Again, they were coming up from southernmore parts that weren't so against knowledge as present at the time present day Europe. And so they were building these hybrid sort of automaton and with their familiar, basically the reliquaries of their familiars, in the same way that we're very used to going into, say, a Catholic church, which is my lineage, and you'd see like the bone objects of a saint. So for witches, that might be very similar. So that's what this is evocative of. Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. And our apologies for the interruption. Thank you for getting deep into that. I had no clue that you were making burnt rosemary resin in the hottest weekend ever. Seattle. Look at that sacrifice.
I'm committed.
You are.
Or should be.
You are.
Didn't you see the picture where I had to throw one of these in the fridge because it was too hot for the wax?
I don't know that I processed that.
Yeah,
that was a whole bonfire within a bonfire situation. I definitely didn't process that. It's also probably a good thing I didn't know, so I couldn't be blamed for.
Are you going to make the deadline? Yes.
Didn't know that was happening, but all good because the show is recorded.
Thank you.
So let's get into the logic gates and the specific language around that, with the and, the or, the not this or that.
Yeah. So again, going back to both my experience as someone learning computer science, but also teaching computer science. In particular, my favorite thing to teach is like physical computing. So again, when I say that, I mean when we're building these like handcrafted interactive experiences. So, I've got toggle switches up there rather than I've got a button on the screen. So it's the same sort of, it's a digital or it's an electronic backend, but you're able to make it yourself rather than working on something that looks like a web experience where everything's just code. I don't like it when it's just code. I want physics to be involved, right? I want friction, gravity, all those things to be part of the problem, right? And so there's these spaces though where poetics leap out at me, and I feel like they're teachable moments for myself, and then I try to use them with my students as well. Like I want this to not be something so dry. I want it to be, alive, and I think that's another problem. The culture of tech has really said it's this like hermetically sealed space that's about profitability, right? Or SEO. So the logic gates are something that I find really fascinating because they exist as ICs, so like little computer chips. So each one of these bones has one in there. But they also exist just as pure mathematics. And then they also exist in language. And some of them are so simple that toddlers can grasp them. So the idea of an AND gate, which is the first one here, we understand what a Venn diagram is. We understand or and and. And so it's this space where concepts in computer science are so simple that we can just experience them as pure language, right? Some of the gates are a little bit more esoteric. But and or ones that we can really get at, and they have pairs in natural language. So I think that demystifies some of what's happening when we're joining two things, and we can join it in code, or we can join it in a circuit. So the and that we might use in code can also just be a chip in a circuit. We combine these two things, right? And so it demystifies it, but in some ways I think it makes it more mystical. At that point. And then the shapes, there's many different ways to refer to these concepts. So the concept of and, we understand that as a plus sign, the word and. We can use other kinds of joiners, but these Venn diagrams are also I didn't make these up, right? These are the diagrams that describe each of these concepts. But they also, to me, are very beautiful. They look like moons or eclipses or phases of the moon. They look like medieval manuscripts that are trying to describe what is the high tech of the time, the understanding of the spheres. And so they sit in that duality of, am I looking at something that is an esoteric, drawing from the 16th century? Or is this a diagram that's explaining how a computer that's in my house works? And so that overlap, I think, is what draws me in. And I like that, NAND, which is there, it's the universal gate. You can make all of these gates out of NAND. You can have an entire computer built of just NAND gates, and if you assemble them in the right way.
And so NAND, sort of break that down, that's not and?
Oh gosh, don't put me on the spot like that. It's gonna be wrong, and I cannot memorize all these. Like, I've been working with them for like 10 years, and I'm still like, X NOR is like exclusive NOR, but then the switches are, So that's kind of why I'm obsessed with them, because I'm always trying to, like, if I make pretty paintings about them, I'll remember. I will not. But they're all sets of switches, and so there are always two inputs. And the logic gate is how those two inputs are treated. So if you have two positives or highs, right? So that moving electrons, do you let the electrons continue to move, or do you stop the electrons? You have stillness, right? So ones and zeros, highs and lows, on and off, all the same thing in these switching scenarios. So
awesome.
Yeah, so that's what's happening with the show. And so these little pockets of poetics that I picked from various definitions. Now there's more logic gates than this. I think there's 16, but these are the only 8 that have analogous computer circuits.
Okay.
So these are, you can physically put these in the circuit. The other ones are sort of redundant, so they don't exist.
I think this will be my last question before we open it up to our in-person audience and also to our virtual audience for questions. So in terms of the trajectory of this work and the different iterations that you have done, how do you understand, how do you experience that trajectory, that journey from the first iteration of the logic gates to this current iteration?
Well, like I said, I mean, I think in the beginning, I was just making up a history that I felt was important to resist the sort of culture of tech. And then I have been surprised to find that more things are true than not. And I think the totality that I'm interested in is, again, this isn't just for me to carve out my own version of history. I want everyone to be empowered to say, I need a different relationship to the history of something, and I need to start making that language, that framework, that aesthetic. And maybe parts of it you'll find out are true, and if they're not, then they just become true because you made them, and they're important. We all have stories to tell. We all have relationships to, protect. With whatever we need. And I think my favorite thing from this entire body of work is when I remind people that electricity is older than water. And so, we think of electricity maybe as like a recent discovery, but there's a big problem with people discovering things a few hundred years ago. So how do we reframe that?
Right, exactly. So with that, we're going to open it to questions, starting first with our in-person audience. If anyone has a question that they would like to pose to Meghan, feel free. Otherwise, I'm happy to start with our virtual, give you guys a chance to get your questions together. I would ask that for our virtual audience to please put your questions in the chat, and we will answer them, as many of them as we can, in the time that remains in the order that they come in. So if you have any questions, this is the time. Please put them in the chat. Make sure your chat is tuned to everyone rather than a direct message, so that everyone participating can see. So please feel free to do so. And again, my colleague has Alexis has put in the chat the online viewing room for those of you who are not in Seattle and have not had a chance to see the exhibition. And then for those of you who are here in Seattle or nearby, the exhibition is open through Saturday, August 21st, and our hours are 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And so I definitely encourage you to see the work, see the exhibition before it closes. But now we'll open it up to a few questions. So please feel free, don't be shy. Yes.
Oh, that's a great question.
And I'll repeat it just in case.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just in case our audience virtually can't hear it. And so the question was, what prompted Meghan to use Rosemary?
So I think for a lot of, especially folks of European ancestry, where there's a pull to understand the old ways and sort of turn away from more recent structures. I'm trying to think of politically astute ways to say that. I'm sitting in a room full of witches, so it's hilarious. So we're many of us are many generations removed from things. So there's an awkward phase of discovery, and that troubling word discovery. And so, we all love the baby witches and the hot topic witches. Like, if that's what gets you started on your journey to just like being at one with the universe and respecting nature, God bless. But along the way, there's definitely some problematic stops. That got an uncomfortable amount of laughter.
I think for those of us who are more tuned in to Instagram, we would like to admit that was a resonant moment. I'll leave it at that because I just ranted last night about a similar topic, so I'll leave it at that.
So one of the stops on this train is the use of sage, for example, and it's like, I'm not going to get into that whole. There's a lot to talk about there, a lot of discussion, not my discussion to have. But if I can pull the baby witches away from that and just say, why don't we look at other traditions of doing smoke cleansing? Let's leave those words alone. Let's leave those plants alone. And let's look at what's in your heritage. And we don't have as much access to that right now. And that's okay, but we have to do some work. Yeah. And so rosemary is one of the plants that gets used a lot in smoke purification rituals in the Celtic part of the world, which is where my ancestors are from. So that's something that, it's as awkward for me to adopt that, but it at least is not stepping on somebody else's traditions. Right. Let's do that. And so I go hard with rosemary. Do you want some rosemary? There's rosemary on everyone's seat in this room. There's rosemary in Kelly's hair. And so that practice of, and I want to embrace the awkwardness. Again, it's like baby witches, do what you got to do, but you have to do some work, and you have to learn your own ways, and you have to work with your own intuition or with whom you study, depending on your practice. And so the rosemary for me has just been a really grounding plant that I work with. It grows in my yard. I work with it. If you carbonize it, all carbonized things are conductive. So now I've got an electrically conductive material. I dig that. And so I'm constantly kind of working in this dual space of like ritual and conducting electricity and doing things with code. And for me, they just sit in the same space. So a circuit is a sigil, is a circle, is a spell. That's just how I live now.
Awesome. I love it.
That's the rosemary.
Dana Cole has a question. Could you talk more about the hedge, the history of it, and how this was a space women occupied, and how does this connect to your work?
Did you solve that? Did I what? Solve the audience. No, I don't know. Nice to meet you, Dana. I know. So the hedge is, first of all, it's a legal term of art from way back. And it's basically like that's the limit. It's a border, but it's also like a nice shrubbery. So, sort of medieval. I think mostly in England. But the hedge is this space that separates the settled from the wild. which is, a very Western idea, but so be it. There's binary. Binaries are kind of a problem. And so hedge witches or hedge riders are people who would pass back and forth between sort of the colonized space or civilized space and wild space, both materially, but also just in the idea of like going into meditation. So I'm going to go to the other, I'm going to pass into the thin place. The thin place, especially in Irish Catholic culture, that's like all, that's Halloween is the thin place. It's the thinnest time of the year. Those of us who are more like drawn to thin places, this is a portal. I sense that it's a portal. So hedge witchery is really about, for me, it boils down to working with plants and trying to use meditation to access imaginary spaces. If I'm going to put it in blunt terms. And, I'm also questioning whether does this metaphor, again, should we break it? Should we be thinking about settled and unsettled, wild and not, or do we ask, why is there a fence here?
Right. Excellent. Heza asks, thank you for the sharing. In what way is the generating and conducting of energy, electricity through witches pulling the universe today?
No pressure. Again, I think that we've done ourselves a disservice when we had this sort of Age of Enlightenment moment where we said that these things are bifurcated. We should stop that. And so I think if people who are motivated not by the relationship to venture capital or like capitalism, are working with these technologies, they have a different goal.
Yeah.
If I'm collecting electricity because I want to make a circle and the circle is a sacred space, that completely displaces our relationship to what electricity is. It stops being a tool and starts being a force. So I think that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. KM Crum, I'm assuming your question is the hedge the same as the veil? If you want to clarify that so I don't misconstrue your question, that would be helpful. But in the meanwhile, we'll go on to Royal Alley Barnes's question, which is, did you intend for us as the audience to begin to wonder where we sit in the algorithm and or hedges that we begin to experience in parts of your work?
I'm going to read that one more time. Yeah, I would love us to do a couple of things. I would love us to have a sense of ownership over electricity. I would like us to see electricity outside of something that the power company gives us. I'd love us to all go into the woods and like just stick disparate metals into the earth and pull current out of the ground and feel it as a force the same way we would enjoy a waterfall or a sunset. And I would love us to see ourselves as being, I would love everyone to be a computer programmer, not in the sense that you're able to do, things on the big web, as it were, but I would like all of us to, understand it's a form of language, it's a form of control for a machine, it's a form of embedding ourselves into other things, that these are familiar, right? These are our avatars. We use that word avatar, it's not too far off. But when we don't control or understand those algorithms, then it does feel very hostile. It feels very disjointed. But if we can say, look, I built, I drew the energy for this. I built the circuit myself. I wrote these words in a sacred way. This is an expression of myself, even though it's a machine. Machines are not these cold things. But if the only people making the machines are late capitalism, then it feels that way. I'm not sure I answered your question.
So to quickly go back to KM Crum's question, they clarified in saying, yes, in terms of is the veil a synonymous term with the hedge?
I wouldn't say it's one-to-one. It's an example of a way that we call out a sort of, a border between two spaces and certain people having more attention paid to going to that space or wondering what's on the other side or getting to the other side. Some of those people are ancestors, right?
Yes, for sure.
So
For sure.
we're not there yet.
Awesome. Okay, RR is asking, did you use the term logic gates, which Megan did? And if so, how do you define that? What does that mean?
So a logic gate is it's a switch, basically. It's an input and an output. So every logic gate has two inputs and one output, except for two of them. You see those at the back. Those just have one input and one output. One is a buffer. So whatever it takes in is what it puts out. It tends to clean up a signal in a circuit. That's what it's doing there. So you have some fuzzy electricity, it's waving around, and you want a nice clean signal. And then you have the inverter. And so it takes whatever coming in and spits out the opposite. So if you're giving me light, I'm giving you dark. If you're giving me yes, I'm giving you no. Right? And so then this starts to get in some language that feels a little bit like some spells. You know, I need to do a deflection spell. I need to do an abundance spell. Right? Am I turning the signal around, or am I amplifying it as it comes at me?
Excellent. So to answer Elsa's question, yes, once this program is done, we are recording it and it will be on CoCA's YouTube channel. And so you will be able to rewatch at a certain point. KM Crum asks again, are you working in 2D, 3D, 4D, or concept?
Yes. All the things. Yeah, sometimes this show was unique in that I was really trying to get back to my painterly roots. So the sort of central pieces in each little installation is an encaustic painting, which is an ancient art. You know, this is encaustic paintings from thousands and thousands of years ago. It's a very archival method. And then right next to it is the integrated circuit. So we go back about 50 years on that. I have worked a lot done a lot of sculptural and interactive work. So yeah, interactive work is inherently sort of 4D. Used to work a lot with like immersive RFID audio database, architectural experiences, things like that. I think I'm just getting, like things are getting a little smaller. And then, I do voiceover work and soundscapes. I do all the things that I can. There are things I can't do, so I don't do them.
For sure.
Singing.
For sure. Our next question again from Royal Alley Barnes. Are you revealing the double-nested nature rather than either or realities that we now insist on for each other? Oh, that's a probing one. That's a probing one.
I feel like I'm defending my dissertation here.
You might be.
So the binary, the idea of binary, the Boolean is what it's called in mathematics. It's something I keep encountering in my work, and it's just, the universe is pushing back. So it's something I definitely, the zeros or ones of like the binary computer science concept, I'm already like, let's think of that more as a wave, right? Can we do that? There's so many of the sort of binaries that exist in the world are like need to be broken down, need to be, and again, what I was saying about the hedge, like, should we be thinking of the not wild and the wild? Does that make any sense for a world we should live in and inhabit? Or is this a broken way of inhabiting the world? But when you get to a point where you're dealing with electrons that aren't a binary of flowing or not flowing, then we're talking about quantum physics. And I'm not there yet. Things that are both in a state and another state that are both waves and particles, I'm not there yet. I'm not sure what
You're
kind
close,
of...
though. We've had conversations that are damn close. You're close.
I got to sit on that hedge for a while.
Yeah. Wow.
hear that all the way. Sarah, you heard it. Can you?
That a lot of the security issues that arise in modern computing come from a breaking of the binary, where within the logic gate, that gate can influence around it, other gates around it, and when it fails to do the expected binary thing it might do, that's where that's happening, right? So if there's a head within the circuit, and that head, like, which is reducing it.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for reiterating and thank you for your comment.
That's great.
It really just links some things together and you're just like, maybe if you all had played with this just a little bit longer and planned maybe for hackers, but I mean, maybe people don't do that. But thank you so much. We have time to entertain maybe one or two more questions before we wrap up here. We have about 8 minutes left to probe a little bit further. If anyone has any questions. Well, actually, I might have one of those questions. And sort of drawing from conversations that you, me, and Sharon have pretty regularly, and the things that both of you all know about my practice outside of art, where would you say this sits for people who are practitioners? Whether it's parallel, whether it's a crossroads, an intersection. Because I think there's an interesting conversation to be had with people who are so far removed from the computer science, electrical aspects of these things, but are doing almost identical kinds of work on the spiritual side. And so, you know, what has your experience been like, been with that? Because again, I feel like I had a breakthrough with this work when I realized that what you were saying is something that I had just done a few hours ago. A different vehicle, but essentially moving an intentional act of moving electricity for all intents and purposes in a certain direction. And then also experiencing the way in which that electricity that I have moved in a certain direction comes back and presents itself in a sort of a form of confirmation in another direction. And so just sort of, you know, maybe more of a riff on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about, again, the simplicity of logic gates, there's other components in electronics that I think would fit the bill, where the idea of an inverter, we need to invert this, we need to repel this, we need to turn this around, we need to use our words, we need to use ritual, we need to use invocation and our gestures and energy, and in some of that energy are some electrons we've moved in a sacred way with some copper and some plants that we planted in our yard, and we have a relationship with this plant and the history of the plant and how our ancestors have used the plant. Then electricity is a little different for us, and computer science is a little different for us. These tools are tools that we've adopted to our needs. They're not being imposed on us by an algorithm controlled by a few rich men. So I think that everyone has space to at least think about some of the more abstract concepts, because math and language are at the core of it. A program is a word, is a spell, right? Math is just adding. We're putting things together. We're taking them apart. And when we have, you know, complex language to talk about that, that seems closer to these practices, where it gets a little woo. No. And so the energy I'm going into trying to understand the quantum is the same energy I'm trying to understand the woo. And maybe they're the same.
Or minimally, the source is the same thing. And it's just sort of two different trajectories. No, definitely. I understand that. Zola Mumford, who I'm happy to, we have two last questions. We'll end with these. First, Heather, and then Zola. Beautiful ideas and looking forward to seeing the work. Curious about other places, sources, you're finding compelling convergences between spiritual and technological electricity.
Hi, Heather. So one of the places, I mean, we all have that backlog of projects that we're like, okay, when I get some time, I'm really interested in the electrical signal systems inside of forests, inside of trees, the mycelium network that sits below that. And again, you know, just resisting the idea that these things are recent and belong to people who've invented some stuff,
Mhm.
that a network is not a new concept. Electricity is not a new concept. You put them together in a particular way and you got a patent, good for you. Let's go out into the forest and examine what's happening there with the electrical signals. How are the trees communicating? Can we network them into a gallery and take a look at what the forest is saying? Because the forest talks to itself, right? There's danger. The sun has gone down. There's some activity over here. This tree is dying. We need to send nutrients to it to keep it going for a few more centuries because this is our mother tree. We want to hang out with her wisdom. Do I want to grab some resin from those trees and make some, circuits that are powered by an anode and a cathode that are created by the disparates between carbonized wood that has resin and carbonized wood that doesn't? So that's where I want to go. I want to go into the forest.
Awesome. And our last question here from Zola Mumford. The way that you combine nature, plant materials, and technologies is fascinating. I was late, so sorry if you already spoke about this. Do you have any favorite science fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy writers, short stories? If so, could that be part of future work?
So say it with me now. Dune, Boss Dune. So I love Dune. It's the story of a guy from down the road in Tacoma who was really bummed out about the oil crisis and the destruction of our planet. We should have listened to him. Anywho, I've been working on, it's sort of on hiatus, but I've been working on a project called Moss Dune, which is basically just like a DIY community theater TikTok retelling of Dune. This was conceived of like in the height of the quarantine, where it's like we just needed stuff to do. And so I took the script and I was like, okay, instead of a desert, it's a wet Pacific Northwest, and we finally see the sun. The story's sort of falling apart now that we live in like this global warming. like maybe it is just Dune now. And instead of sandworms, it's slugs. And it was just like a fun, dumb project. Like, let's make props with moss on them. Dune's one of my favorite. Octavia Butler, of course, is the godmother of this all, and we should have also listened to her on all of the books. I'm gonna draw a blank now. Erewhon, I think, is a book that everyone should check out. It's mid-19th century. It's possibly, wait, now I'm blanking. Butler and Jihad in Dune is possibly a reference to Samuel Butler, who wrote Erewhon, which is nowhere spelled backwards. In it is the Book of the Machines. And it's really interesting because it's mid-19th century discussion of like the problems of having mechanical beings around you. So that like technophobia showing up early. But I like that it's just this diss between the Darwin family and his family. It's very complicated. It's like a whole big drama thing. I might do it. I'm not even on TikTok, but I might do a TikTok about the drama between the Darwin family and the Butler family and how this book is him throwing shade at Darwin. Those guys were petty. Anyway.
So we are officially at 6:59 p.m. This is probably one of the few programs that has ended on the minute before the hour. I want to first and foremost thank all of you, our guests in person and virtually. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. Thank you, of course, to Meghan for this amazing talk and for this beautiful show. Again, the show is on until Saturday, August 21st. Our gallery hours are 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So you have tomorrow and Saturday to see the show before it closes. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great time, much appreciated. And please connect with us on YouTube, where this video, once edited, will be uploaded. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Have a great evening.